First and foremost, thank you. Actually, the purpose of doing this is that we are working currently with the NGO CSW for the UN Women, and that we are doing a parallel event where we talk about bridging the gender gap, talking about gender inequalities, talking about the SDG goal, generation equality, to reach gender equality, and all those things. So, with reference to that, we are talking to topmost people like you from different sectors, and what are the policies of the government, or what are the steps being taken by the government, have been taken, are being taken, what are the future plans and goals, so that we can bridge this gender gap, bridge the gender divide. And I know our Indian government is very much, in fact, consciously, overactively working to see that we bridge the gender gap, and I think India is having a pretty good standing for that. Having said that, sir, you are taking care of a very important department, wherein now when we talk of entrepreneurs, the first and foremost thing which now comes in the mind of everybody is women entrepreneur. And we all know that with so much things going on. So first simple question goes to you that normally, when we talk of women entrepreneurs, people have something in mind that, okay, women entrepreneurs means athana khakra thepla, and they can't get into technology field, or they can't get into automations or things like that. So, sir, first and foremost thing is that what are the steps being taken to break the stereotypes?
First, let me just firstly thanks Ruzan. It's been a pleasure interacting with you since probably the first time since I left Ahmedabad. Yes. So thanks for giving me this opportunity to meeting you, and through you to a larger group of audience who is going to see this. As you know, the Honorable Prime Minister has been a strong votary of gender equality, and India is a signatory to the gender equality, various international covenants, treaties, including the SDG goals. And very consciously, and there is a department, separate Ministry for Women and Child Welfare, is headed by a very active Honorable Minister Smriti Irani. And states also have a similar Women and Child Welfare Department, where they look into various issues involved with bringing women to the forefront. Traditionally, it is being seen that the share of women in the informal workforce is large, but in the formal, organized, white-collar, entrepreneurial sections of the women, traditionally the representation of Indian women has been poor. But then, let's not single out India. So also is the percentage, if you see the global parameter, many other countries much higher in the developmental agenda than us are also more or less in similar positions. If you look at the top board positions of various enterprises across the world, women are not as represented as the numbers should suggest in the top board positions or the top corporate positions across many global corporates. The Indira Nuis and the others are an exception. They're not the generic norm. So having said that, there is a lot of conscious policy by the Government of India as well as by many state governments to increase the participation of women in the organized entrepreneurial workforce. To give some few examples, in the startup, there are certain carve-outs for the women. The startup policy of Government of India, if somebody looks at it, very significantly gives a lot of emphasis on recognition of startups from amongst women entrepreneurs. I interact with a lot of startups because startup is a subject that our ministry looks after. And I'm very happy to share that the numbers are rising, and the quality of their work and the quality of the women who are jumping into this arena is increasing year by year. Recently, on the International Women's Day, through our Startup India division here, we had an interactive section with some of the leading startup women entrepreneurs who have set up very, very good enterprise. And so that is one. In patents and this thing, there is a separate carve-out for women in registering of patents, a separate rate for registering, a discounted rate for registering, as well as special priority for women. So a lot of very conscious policy decisions have been taken. whether it is lending to them, whether it is in the MSME sector or many other such sectors. So that is, it's a process, and as women break many of the stereotypes, break many of the gender barriers, you will see increasingly more and more women in the entrepreneurial field. So that is the brief background to what I wanted to say on the first question.
Okay. Fine. Sir, so if you have more figures than I do, that, normally when it talks of angel investors or funding of women entrepreneurs, specifically, there is a huge gap between that. The women entrepreneurs do not get as much funded as others do. So, sir, for that, what is the collective efforts being taken? Because as you rightly said, that now the government is trusting a lot for women entrepreneurs, have a lot of schemes. In fact, I didn't know about this patenting thing, because yes, sir, once I had gone to get my patenting done, and it was very costly, even after some discounts been given. So I thought I don't want to do it at that stage. So having said that, sir, I wanted to understand that what are the collective efforts being done so that the women and male entrepreneurs are treated at par and the funding comes at par. That's the only thing, sir, we want.
So the legal system or the various government policies do not distinguish or do not discriminate against women. Let's be very clear about that.
Yes.
It's more a question of stereotypes. In fact, a leading woman startup entrepreneur on that International Women's Day celebrations told me that when she went to a bank for a financial proposal, the bankers told him, now, okay, they thought she's an employee. She said, where is the main person? Somebody who is driving it. So she was embarrassed to say that she is the main person. So this is a stereotype. This is a gender notions that we have. These are the things that have to be broken. And government, as I said, to many such carve out across ministries, across various policies that you will see, is very working on that, and we are seeing the results. Though the results need to be much faster than what we are seeing, but I'm sure with this sustained pressure on this and the sustained involvement of all ministries under the overall mandate that the role of women should be more recognized and promoted and encouraged, you will see better trust in this, better movement in this direction.
Sir, these incubation centers specifically, they do help the startups. The incubation centers, probably what I understand, is majorly for startups to start their entrepreneur journey. But what about existing entrepreneurs? Let's say entrepreneur is maybe into business past 1 or 2 years, but unfortunately, because I know a few, they wanted to join a few startups, I get into that incubation center. But as they were already 1 or 2 years already in it, they were not given the entry. So my point is that when a person starts his entrepreneur journey, her entrepreneur journey, at that time they don't have this ways and means to enter into an incubator. So, sir, do you have any policies that you can also allow this? Because or what can we do about such people?
Firstly, any such woman entrepreneur who is listening to this from India particularly, they should, if they want to start as a startup, and if they have a good business proposition or a good idea, a good technology, they should first register themselves under the DPIIT web portal as a startup, because that's the starting point for opening up of many benefits under many schemes. And also the startup team that we have, they will also handhold and help in many of their queries. So that is the first starting thing. If any entrepreneur whom you interact with, woman entrepreneur, you must advise them that they should first register in the DPIIT website. They should also register themselves if there are states like Gujarat, for sure I know,
yes,
recognizes startup. So that is also another thing for the state scheme. Secondly, we are coming out with 2 major policies. We have already announced one. One is the seed fund scheme, where many early stage startups, they die because of the lack of support, financial support at the early stage, or they are not finding an incubator to ride on. And incubators also require support. So the seed fund scheme, which has been announced by the Honorable Prime Minister on the last Startup International Conference, has already been announced. It has been approved by Government of India. It is coming into force from the next financial year, starting from 1st April. Another major handicap which many startups and particularly women startups face is lack of support from the banks and the for both working capital, capex, and also for equity. So, since because of the general aversion for banks and all for startup as a community, though RBI recognizes startup as a priority sector lending, there are many government policies to encourage startup. We are coming out with considering a national credit guarantee scheme, specially designed towards startup, just like you have a credit guarantee scheme for MSMEs. So there is a credit guarantee scheme for MSMEs, and there is a upcoming under consideration scheme for startups, a credit guarantee scheme. Once this one is approved and the existing MSME scheme, women entrepreneurs, to the extent that they're MSMEs or their startups, will benefit tremendously from this credit guarantee scheme that is being launched.
Good.
That is being under consideration. It has to go to the cabinet, but it is at the almost last stage of consultation. Let's see what is the final call on that.
Sir, okay, now a little bit I'll shift to the rural entrepreneurs, because there is other than the normal stereotypes which we have to break, there are also other mindsets which we want us to break. So for rural women, and the rural women mindset is different, their innovations are in fact different, and unfortunately they are very innovative. If you also see, like, a lot of times we call them jugad, online jugads or things like that. But unfortunately, these women entrepreneurs are not motivated to take that particular innovation, or how they can see that the innovation grows. So how can the incubators, or how can the government particularly, because let us accept one thing, sir, that first point woman, then a rural woman. So there are a lot of negatives which go behind it. So it is pretty difficult for any them doing handholding with other people. But how can the government do handholding with them and bring that innovation and support that innovation? That jugaad.
There is a very conscious policy now. Today we have almost 50,000 startups which are registered under the DPIIT website. And every year this number increases by 5,000 to 6,000. Initially, when the startup registration process started 5 years back, it was only focused around some of the metro cities like Bangalore, Chennai, Hyderabad, Delhi, Mumbai. Now we see a very steady penetration to the tier 2, tier 3 cities and the rural areas. In fact, we have got registrations of startups from areas like Lakshadweep and Andaman and Arunachal and all. So which were not exactly the mainstream metro cities. So this is a conscious policy decision on behalf of the startup division here to encourage more and more participation of startups in the registration process. Once you register, there's a lot of handholding which takes place. But at the same time, there are some states which have got very proactive startup departments in their state. Like Gujarat has one, Kerala, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Karnataka, whole lot of UP, the whole lot of so many states have very proactive policies to encourage startup and entrepreneurs from among women, particularly among the smaller towns and the rural areas. So let us utilize these government avenues, the central government departments, the state governments which are proactively involved in this, and also some of the leading NGOs can play a lot of role in bringing them to the mainstream. So that is how a combined efforts can be put in.
Okay, fine. Sir, there are a lot of government schemes, and as you rightly said, for women entrepreneurship, we are trying to boost them, startups for women entrepreneurs. But sir, there are figures you would be also having them, that every startup, in fact, it is very difficult for a startup to survive for the first 3 years in any business. In fact, when I started my small business, at that time it was not called entrepreneur. We used to call ourselves nano dhando, small business. So sir, for any business to survive, one requires 1,000 days and things like that. But I've seen that nowadays with startups, they all want to grow big very fast or get millions in funding or angel investments and things like that. And they die also. I mean, the number of startups which come up, similarly, there are equal number of startups which die or which don't go ahead. So, sir, what can we do? Because, sir, at one point of time, we are proud that we have so many startups coming up and things like that. But when we talk of success stories, yes, we are having a few success stories, no doubt on that. But, we have a long way to go. So, sir, what as a government, what can be done? I know there are a lot of things that a startup has to do, but from the government angle, what can we do to boost the ecosystem? I personally believe that still we have to do a lot for the ecosystem to build up so that the startup can sustain for the first 3 years, because first 3 years are always important.
All these policies of the national startup policy, all these components, they are designed to strengthen the ecosystem. Firstly, recognizing startup as an important constituent of the economic development process, we have devised national startup policy in 2016, and we are very consciously engaged with the startup community, and many of them women. So every ministry now is coming out with their own startup specific policies, whether a very scientific department like Department of Space, Department of Defense Production, Department of Biotechnology, many other departments, Department of Electronics, they are coming out with a startup specific policy where they're encouraging startups to come with ideas and practices that can be replicated and where they can play a role. Apart from that, I gave some of the initiatives like recognizing startup for priority sector lending, recognizing startups for a seed fund support, recognizing startup and devising a policy for a credit guarantee scheme for startup. These are some of the support they require. Despite doing all this, you have to assume that this is the nature of business, not only startup, not only women, but everywhere. For every certain number of businesses which take off and flourish, there will be certain businesses which don't take off, which don't match with the requirements of the time, and they collapse. So that is natural, that happens in every business. But a lot of things are being done to strengthen the startup ecosystem. And some of the examples that I gave.
Put this point so that it becomes easy for the listeners, that let's say if I want to start a business, the first and foremost thing I should do is first I should register at for the startup at DPIIT website.
If it is a startup, yeah.
Second, I would rather say that check the Gujarat, as I'm from Gujarat, check the Gujarat government website and try to go to those incubation centers with your project. Whatever project you have, that's what I believe, because the incubation centers would help us to develop the project further. Have I understood it right, sir?
Yes.
And third, with the hand-holding of that incubation center, then I take up my innovation, my project, or whatever advice or suggestion or mentor, because I'm sure they also have mentor facilities, because nowadays mentoring is very, very important. And a lot of mentoring people have also turned up. So I think this is how, if anybody wants to start a business, this is the one way to do it. Am I right?
Yes, very correct. And once you are doing this, I'm sure that a lot of hand-holding and support and encouragement will come in the process.
Last question. Then what would you like to tell first to the wannabe women entrepreneurs? And what would you like to tell the existing women entrepreneurs? And third, what would you like to tell those entrepreneurs who are women entrepreneurs, those who have tried past 3 years, but now they feel that their business is not going anywhere? So for all these three, what would you like to do?
The question is, I don't think you can stop any entrepreneur, and more so a woman entrepreneur, because they're much more determined to climb up come out of the barriers, these general stereotypes, and they're quite determined. And you are seeing that in many fields, starting from ordinary things like driving a bus or a public transport, to many other very joining the armed forces and coming out in boardrooms and coming out in corporate entities. So that process is on. There is a lot of government support for it, for breaking this stereotype, for facilitating them, for enabling them. So idea is to pursue it. There is a lot of hand-holding which also happens, but that probably needs to be strengthened. The idea is, at the end of this, a business is all about taking risks. If business were devoid of risk, it won't be a business, it will be a government job. So that has to be kept in mind. So business has its windfalls, business has its pitfalls. So those risks nobody can minimize. But at the same time, ecosystem strengthening is what the government has to look into, and which the government is doing. As I gave so many examples of what is being done to strengthen the startup ecosystem. And you will see a lot of actions happening on that front. So through this forum today, I wish all the women entrepreneurs who are venturing into something which they have not done before, but which they are eminently qualified to do, which they have the confidence, the capabilities, and the skills to do. And I wish them all the best in their journey. And I'm sure that government, whether it is central government or the state government, will also facilitate this journey. And my sincere thanks to you, Ruzan, and all your listeners through this forum, all your participants. My best wishes for the journey ahead.
Thank you, sir.